The World Service, it's 10 o'clock GMT. This is Oliver Conway with the newsroom. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is still in intensive care as he battles COVID-19.
The Prime Minister is someone who has amazing energy, great determination to do the very best for the country that he loves. And therefore, it's naturally concerning when the Prime Minister is ill, but he is receiving the best possible treatment.
We hear from our correspondent at the hospital. Also on the newsroom, for the first time since the outbreak began, China reports no new deaths from the coronavirus. Thousands of Indians are stuck in Iran, unable to return home because of the lockdown. As more governments advise people to wear a face mask, we find out how to make your own.
I'm rubbish when it comes to crafting, honestly, and even I was able to make it while a video was running.
And one other headline, the former Vatican treasurer, Cardinal George Pell, is freed from jail after being cleared of child sex abuse. First, our top stories.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. For the first time since mainland China started publishing daily virus outbreak numbers, it has reported no deaths from COVID-19. The National Health Commission recorded 32 new cases of the virus, down from 39 the day before. Stephen McDonnell is in Beijing.
It's the first time since back in January when the authorities started publishing these daily figures that we've had 0 deaths from the virus. Now that's despite the fact that people have questioned the veracity of these figures. There's a lot of debate about whether or not they're capturing all the infections and all the deaths. But I still think there's a lot of reason for hope in this sort of 0 new deaths figure. And that's because, according to the experts, even if those figures are underreported, what's important is the trend.
A senior British cabinet minister has said the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is not on a ventilator, despite having been taken into intensive care on Monday night. The minister, Michael Gove, confirmed that Mr Johnson had been given oxygen and said he was shocked by the news. Here's Norman Smith.
I think it was a shock for all of us, really, wasn't it? Because I think Downing Street had, to be honest, downplayed the severity of his symptoms. Last week they were repeatedly describing them as mild. And you remember on Friday when he put out that video, he said himself that he was beginning to feel better and that he only had a minor symptom, which was a high temperature. So listening to that, you kind of thought, well, OK, it's been difficult, but he seems to be getting through this. And then suddenly, on Sunday night, he's admitted to hospital, and Monday, bang, he's in intensive care. I think that probably is genuinely shocking to everyone.
Japan has declared a state of emergency in its capital and 6 other prefectures in response to the coronavirus, giving governors in Tokyo and the other listed regions greater powers to deal with the outbreak for a period of 1 month. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes is in Tokyo.
Really, here in Tokyo over the last week, we've seen the number of confirmed cases of coronavirus really starting to climb quite rapidly, and the graph has started to look worryingly like London and New York, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So there is a real fear here now. I've spoken to specialists here, and they say, look, we are really on the verge of a major outbreak here in Tokyo if something isn't done. There's been mounting pressure on the government here to do something. But Japan's constitution does not allow lockdowns like we've seen in parts of Europe, so it will be an advisory, and there won't be any sanctions for people who break those advisories. But Japanese people are pretty law-abiding, and so we do expect people to pay attention to that and to stay at home.
South Korean health officials say the number of new virus infections has dropped below 50 for the second time in 2 days. But they warn that individuals must remain vigilant or the country could see infections spread again. News from the BBC. The Taliban in Afghanistan has walked out of landmark talks with the government that began last week as part of a deal between the militant group and Washington. These face-to-face talks were meant to facilitate the freeing of hundreds of prisoners held by both sides. Here's Ambarasan Eturajan.
A Taliban spokesman said they would no longer participate in what he described as fruitless discussions with the Afghan government. He blamed the administration of President Ashraf Ghani for delaying the prisoner release under one pretext or another. But a government negotiator said the Taliban were unreasonably demanding the release of 15 commanders involved in what he called big attacks. He added, "We cannot release the killers of our people."
The former president of Chad, Hissène Habré, who is serving life for war crimes, has been granted 2 months leave from jail. The judge in Senegal, where Mr. Habré is being held, ruled that he should be released because his prison is being used as a coronavirus quarantine centre for new detainees. Mr. Habré's lawyer argued that his age made him particularly vulnerable to the virus. He will have to stay inside his home in Dhaka for the duration. Mr. Habré was convicted of rape, killings and other crimes. Iraq is to become the latest country to hold a nationwide expression of solidarity and support for health workers and others tackling the coronavirus pandemic. The government has said that the national anthem will be broadcast across all media at 7 this evening local time, and people will be encouraged to give voice to their feelings. WhatsApp is limiting the number of chats to which people can send forwarded messages. As part of efforts to fight misinformation, they'll now be limited to 1, down from the previous limit of 5. Large technology firms have come under fire for facilitating the spread of fake news about COVID-19. BBC News.
Thank you very much. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with Oliver Conway. Boris Johnson's condition is reported to be unchanged today after he was suddenly moved into intensive care last night after suffering breathing difficulties. The British Prime Minister has been in hospital since Sunday with COVID-19. Yesterday, his colleague said he was still in charge of the government, but that has clearly changed after he was moved into an intensive treatment bed. The Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove said he was sure Mr Johnson would pull through.
The Prime Minister is someone who has amazing energy, great determination, a desire all the time to make sure that things are moving forward. And he displays a great zest for life on the tennis court, but he also, in government, is a force of nature, a bundle of energy, determined to do the very best for the country that he loves. And therefore, it's naturally concerning when the Prime Minister is ill, but he is receiving the best possible treatment. And all last week, he was following the advice that he was being given by his doctors. He had a stripped back diary in order to make sure that the appropriate medical advice could be followed.
And in the past few minutes, we've heard that Mr Gove is now self-isolating after a family member showed signs of the coronavirus. The Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, has been put in charge for now of Britain's response to the pandemic. The newsroom's Charlotte Gallagher is outside St Thomas's Hospital, where the Prime Minister is being treated.
Only the sickest patients are treated in intensive care, Ollie, so it shows the seriousness of this situation. We're being told that Boris Johnson has received oxygen, but he isn't on a ventilator. But the reason why they've moved him into intensive care, they say, is because he'll be nearer to a ventilator if he needs one. Now, Michael Gove, one of his colleagues in government, said it showed that if the most powerful man in Britain could be struck down by coronavirus, it could happen to any one of us. Obviously, a very worrying time for his friends and family. His partner is pregnant at the moment. She's not able to see her fiancé. In fact, most people that are treated with coronavirus, they're not able to have any visitors while they're in hospital. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. One NHS doctor told the BBC that we also need to focus on the number of people that are recovering from coronavirus. Yes, it is a serious situation, but lots of people are getting better when they get the right treatment. Now, here at St Thomas's Hospital, lots of other patients obviously being treated here, but it's not a usual day. There's armed police surrounding the building, which you obviously wouldn't see. Media crews from across the world here. I can see America, France. The interest in this story that one of the most powerful men, perhaps in the world, is now being treated for coronavirus.
Charlotte Gallagher outside St Thomas's Hospital. So how serious a moment is this? I've been speaking to our political correspondent, Rob Watson.
I think it's a grave moment for Mr Johnson personally, for his family, for his fiancée. It's a grave moment indeed for the country and I think for the government. And indeed, despite the better figures on infections and deaths in recent days, clearly a very grave moment for the country. And one senses with the hospitalisation of the Prime Minister and then him being moved to intensive care that although in the last 3 or 4 weeks we've all become used to the surreal stopping of the economy, everything changing, this feels different. I mean, you can sort of feel this as a country trying to make sense of it all, and I think it just makes it all more frightening and strange.
This time yesterday when Boris Johnson was in hospital, it was said he was still getting his red boxes with all his government papers and still in charge of things from his hospital bed. Is the current setup up to the task of running the country?
It's a very good question. Look, I don't think there's any doubt that for the last couple of days, Mr. Johnson had been slowing down because, rather tellingly, the man who is now in charge, who's been deputised to chair meetings, Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, when he was asked at the Downing Street news conference yesterday afternoon, when was it that you last spoke to the Prime Minister, he revealed it was Saturday. So clearly, Mr. Johnson has not been driving the government in the way that he clearly was and would like to do. But to get to your question directly, look, on the one hand, the United Kingdom, like other Western countries, has a pretty sophisticated government. It has government ministers, there are procedures, it has a very large permanent bureaucracy or civil service as it's known, and there are 4 powerful committees of government ministers dealing with various aspects of the coronavirus crisis. But you do get a sort of sense that there have been strains among ministers, as of course there would be in dealing with such a crisis. And not to have the Prime Minister, the first among equals, in charge is clearly a blow. And I would say one other thing, to put it rather brutally, that essentially, the man leading the effort to keep us all safe in this country from the virus is lying in intensive care. And whatever else you can say about government measures and procedures and who's in charge, I mean, that is clearly serious and people feel it.
Rob Watson there. More than 3 months since the new coronavirus SARS-2 began spreading through the city of Wuhan and beyond, China has declared no new deaths from COVID-19, the associated disease. Tomorrow, the authorities are expected to lift the lockdown in Wuhan. Stephen McDonnell is our correspondent in Beijing.
No new coronavirus deaths in 24 hours. It is quite something. Now, sure, there are those who would say there are problems with the official figures, that they've been underreported. They couldn't possibly have counted all of the infections. They couldn't possibly have counted all of the deaths. But that doesn't matter so much when you consider that the important thing is the trend. So, it could be twice as many dead, it could be 10 times as many dead. But the scientists are telling us that either way, the trend seems to be right. So if you imagine that as a graph, that's gone up and bounced back down again, and the real world evidence would seem to suggest that we are kind of coming out the other end here in China. I mean, for example, the elites here wouldn't be allowing people to travel from Hubei province to Beijing if they thought it was dangerous. And in the coming hours, they'll finally be opening up Wuhan to the outside world. The city where this global catastrophe began will again have connections that people can leave the city for the first time since January.
And as these restrictions are lifted, will there still be control measures in place for people coming in? Will people have to wear masks in certain circumstances?
Yeah, there's still a lot of social distancing measures that remain in place all over China. I mean, in Beijing, for example, you still can't go into an apartment block unless you're a resident there. You can't enter most buildings unless you're wearing a mask. So you can see that they're taking it very slowly. And cinemas haven't opened up yet again. Karaoke places or all that type of stuff. Restaurants are open, but not all of them. And those that are open have capped the number of diners. And you're supposed to sort of maintain a level of distance between the next table. So it's kind of a slowly reopening approach where little by little they're sort of releasing the valves to see how it goes, because we're still getting these new infections in the form of people arriving, mostly Chinese citizens from overseas, coming in from North America, from Europe, and bringing the virus back with them.
Stephen McDonnell in Beijing. After much debate around the world, more countries are telling their citizens to wear face masks when out and about. But there are no masks to be had in the shops, and the authorities are trying to direct any supplies they can get hold of to health professionals. So what about making your own? Is it easy? Is it safe? Our reporter Siobhan Leahy has been speaking to one organisation, Masks for All, to find out.
And then I come all the way through, just past this join in the fabric, and then I do the same on the other side.
This DIY face mask tutorial video on YouTube has racked up almost 250,000 views since it was uploaded a week ago. It was posted by Masks for All, a global movement founded by scientists and entrepreneurs that want to see mandatory mask laws implemented in the US and the rest of the world to stop the spread of the virus. They believe homemade masks can be critical in protecting you against COVID-19 and encourage people to be inventive with the basic fabrics they already have at home. Jeremy Howard is a research scientist at the University of San Francisco and one of the co-founders of Masks for All. He's also the voice that you just heard in that YouTube video a moment ago. So I gave him a call to get some tips.
I'm rubbish when it comes to crafting, honestly, and even I was able to make a t-shirt while a video was running. So basically the material you want is anything except your skin. So non-medical type can be a scarf you wrap around your face. It could be a bandana. It could be cutting up a t-shirt and tying it around your head, or the approach that the US Surgeon General demonstrated in a video, which is to fold up a handkerchief and put hair ties at each end. A couple of layers of cotton, such as from a t-shirt, is nice. If you want to really spruce it up, according to